There's an African proverb that says if the lions don't tell their stories, the hunters will get all the credit. I'm telling you the story now because you're young lions and lionesses.
My great-grandfather had been in slavery, and it goes across generations. You just don't get rid of it simply because there are no chains on you.
The effects of slavery are still very prominent, just as the effects of the Holocaust are still very prominent amongst our brothers and sisters in the Jewish community.
The Jewish people have the DNA in their soul to look up close to what happened to African Americans after slavery.
We came to the South, young Jews, rabbis, many of them refugees from Nazi Germany. We hear Dr. King quoting the prophets. That was extraordinary. It made us proud.
Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel said, the future of America will depend on how it responds to Dr. King.
It was the work that Dr. King had spoken for, fairness, equality against anti-Semitism, and sort of freedom for Soviet Jews.
A large Jewish presence in the civil rights movement was evident almost from the beginning.
Well, Stan Levinson and Harry Wachtel were lawyers who worked with Dr. King. They were advisors, marchers, fundraisers. They were in the thick of things.
Many Jewish students worked all across the South. And I will never, ever forget 3 young men, Andy Goodman, Micah Scherner, and James Shady.
Birmingham is Birmingham.
We all know the Exodus is the central narrative of our redemption. And here is a modern situation. Shall we do nothing?
We could not have gotten anywhere had not Protestants, Catholics, and Jews showed up from all over the world.
Rabbi Yaakov Prince spoke immediately before Dr. King.
The most shameful and the most tragic problem is silence.
The civil rights challenges of our time, the human rights challenges of our day, they hang on me. They hang on you. They hang on who? They hang on us.
We all need to get together to find out the bigger picture. Those who have been stepped upon to lead the way.
It's all about our humanity. And if we don't figure out a way truly to work together, we'll just be like hamsters on a wheel. The systemic oppression and issues will just continue.
There are too many people living in fear. If Rabbi Hersher and Martin Luther King Jr. were here today, I think they would be saying, we need to pull together the generation yet unborn.
Soul of America is at stake.
Good evening. My name is Anat Sultan Dodon, and I'm the Consul General of Israel in Atlanta. I would like to welcome you all to tonight's programming, a part of our series of conversations on working together against all hate. In last week's conversation with Emi Palmo, which is available to view on our Facebook page and YouTube channel, the former Director General of Israel's Ministry of Justice provided insight into the work of the Israeli government-established anti-racism unit. Tonight, we will be discussing community policing in Israel and the United States and its importance and relevance to current issues.
Good evening again. I'm Sierra Weiss, Director of Academic Affairs and Jewish Community Relations at the Israeli Consulate in Atlanta.
And I'm Wendell Shelby Wallace, the Consulate's Director of External Affairs.
Sierra and Wendell will be introducing today's speakers, who are each truly impressive. However, I would like to first personally welcome Dr. Robert Friedman. Robbie is a Professor Emeritus of Criminal Justice and founding director of GILI, the Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange at Georgia State University. He's the author of several books, including Criminal Justice in Israel and Community Policing, Comparative Perspectives and Prospects. His abundance of scholarly achievements and research have earned him honors and awards from many highly respected organizations, including the Georgia Association of Chiefs of Police, the Society of Former Special Agents of the FBI, Georgia State University, the American Israel Chamber of Commerce, Georgia Commission on the Holocaust, Georgia Association of Chiefs of Police, and the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. He joins us tonight with over 30 years of experience and expertise, and we're honored to have him with us. Welcome, Robbie.
Thank you, Anat, very much. Really appreciate being with you.
We're also excited to have two police chiefs with ties to Atlanta, and just found out today they also have both have ties to Fort Bragg in North Carolina as well. As we know, Atlanta has been dubbed the city too busy. Hey, joining us tonight is Chief C.J. Davis, who's a native of Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and was a longtime resident of Atlanta prior to moving to Durham, where she's currently serving as the chief of police. Throughout her career, Chief Davis has gained a notoriety for many of her accomplishments, including serving as the first African-American woman to lead the Durham Police Department, serving as the 42nd National President of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, NOBLE, and having completing training programs with the National FBI Academy, the Police Executive Research Forum, PERF, and Mercer University, just to name a few. Welcome, Chief C.J. Davis. Also joining us is retired Chief George Turner, who currently serves as the Vice President of Safety and Security for the Atlanta Hawks. Prior to serving in this role, Chief Turner retired from the Atlanta Police Department with over 35 years of service. During his tenure, he was the 23rd Chief of Police for the city of Atlanta, assuming that role in 2010. Of his many professional accomplishments, Chief Turner was appointed as Public Safety Commissioner by Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, becoming the first to fill this position. In this capacity, he oversaw the Atlanta Police and Fire Departments and the Office of Emergency Preparedness and Departments of Corrections. Welcome, Chief Turner.
Also joining tonight's discussion is another remarkable leader within law enforcement. Special Agent Rafiq Ahmad is currently the Special Agent in charge of the Department of Labor, Office of the Inspector General, Atlanta Regional Office. Mr. Ahmad has over 32 years of government service, having previously worked as a supervisory special agent with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, beginning his career in Bureau headquarters in 1987. A native of Baltimore, Maryland, Mr. Ahmad has been a stalwart in the community, serving as a mentor to young men and women in the greater Atlanta community. Mr. Ahmad frequently provides lectures to youth on the importance of decisions and consequences and the value of making quality decisions. Mr. Ahmad provides lectures in life skills, bridging the gap between law enforcement and the community, peer pressure, and the importance of education. Mr. Ahmad is a member of the 100 Black Men of South Metro, where he serves as an executive board member of the South Metro chapter, is the current president of the Georgia chapter of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, and is a member of Atlanta Metropole. Thank you so much for joining. Let's welcome all our amazing panelists. Thank you for being with us tonight. Our conversation will be broken up into 3 sections. The first 2 will consist of a moderated questions from Wendell and I, and the last will focus on questions from our audience with us tonight. And don't worry, you don't have to try to remember your questions until the end. Feel free to use the Q&A feature found at the lower portion of your screen at any time during the conversation, and we'll try to answer as many questions as possible. And those we can't get to, we will respond to after today's conversation.
Well, we like to make this conversation as engaging as possible. So feel free to use the reaction buttons that are located on Zoom. It's a new feature which we have activated for tonight's session. So let's take a moment to test those features out now. Try raising your hands, try using the emoji button. Okay, let's see. Okay, I see folks raising their hands. Okay, cool. All right, perfect. So I see your chief is raising his hand as well. Perfect, okay. So Sierra, would you like to kick us off?
Glad to, thank you, Wendell. So I'm gonna start with a question for you, Dr. Friedman. In our first segment, we will unpack terminology and explore the history of community policing. And as Dr. Elizabeth Hornsby shared in our first discussion in the Against All Hate series, it's important that we have the same understanding when we're speaking of key terms. So as we start tonight's discussion, we have placed on the screen, or we're about to place on the screen, the definition of community policing, which was adopted in 2019 by the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the IACP. As the founding director of GILI, you wrote the first definition of community policing back in 1992. Can you tell us how you and the IACP arrived at this well-articulated definition we see on the screen, and quickly walk us through its different components?
Well, thank you, Sierra, and I want to thank the Consul General of Israel and Consul General Ahmad Badon, and again, Sierra and Wendell, for putting this series up. I've watched them so far and I have learned a lot, and I'm very proud to participate in it. Let me get to the point, and the 2 issues that I want to mention. If you look at the 1960s and 70s, that was the peak of the crime rate that started sort of in the middle 60s, and only in the late 80s and early 90s started to sort of dwindle down. And at that time, a lot of police chiefs were looking at ways to help resolve the crime issue, which basically ended up as a revolving door. You got somebody caught committing a criminal act, going through the justice system, ending up in prison, released, committing crime again, back to prison. That's a revolving door. And if you look at the history of the American policing movement, until the mid-70s, it was basically reactionary in approach. I should probably be more accurate to say reactive in approach. That means crime happened, it took place, somebody then called for police, or if police were out on the street, they tried to catch the perpetrator, collect the evidence, and process people through the justice system. The problem is that it doesn't deal with the whole issue of crime causation. Why does crime take place in the first place? So in the 70s, mid-70s, and particularly in the early 80s, a group of leading chiefs in the United States got together and said, how do we move away from this? And hence the implementation, the initial implementation of community policing in the United States. What was interesting is that it did not start in the United States. It actually started in England, copied in Canada, and only then started to have an impact on the United States. So I was very interested in it because from my undergraduate years all the way through my PhD and after that, I'm interested in policing, and I'm interested in what causes police work. Why do police get engaged in the community to catch perpetrators? So I started to look at community policing as this new philosophy, if you will, and this new philosophy didn't have a definition. What we had until then were basically two sets of the so-called 10 Commandments. One is the set from John Alderson from Southwest England, and the second one from Trojanowicz and Buckaroo, who were police scholars in the United States. Trojanowicz is a former police chief and Buckaroo is an academic. And they basically had a guideline of what do you need to do in order to have community policing in the community. But I didn't define what it is. So I came up with a definition in '92 that the big difference in it was A, it was comprehensive, and B, it was the first definition in the literature, and C, it actually tried to focus on crime causation. And this definition was in the literature, one of, the typical academic outputs. And then last year in 2019, the IACP, which is the International Association of Chiefs of Police, adopted that definition with some minor modifications as the guiding principle of community policing. And to me, that is probably more important than all of the awards that I've gotten because it goes to the heart of the issue. So Wendell, if you'll help me, I'm going to go through the few components of the definition. So first of all, it is a comprehensive philosophy that guides policy and strategy aimed at achieving more. Go ahead, Wendell. Effective and efficient crime control and reduce fear of crime. This is very important because everybody is interested in reducing crime and doing it effectively and efficiently, but not enough people are talking about reducing fear of crime. And the relationship between crime and fear of crime is not always linear or straight. Sometimes there's no crime, but for some reason people are afraid of crime. And that oftentimes affects the quality of life of people. It affects where they buy, where they shop, or where they do business or establish businesses. Next. The definition is looking at improving quality of life. That was never an issue before the definition came up. The closest one to that was Herman Goldstein, who was talking about problem-oriented policing. Let's resolve problems in the community. Next. And also improving police services and police legitimacy. When you think about police legitimacy today, you know that it is being put into question. But to say that in 1992, it was not really an issue, but it's still very important to have better police services and to have police legitimacy. Next. Now, all of this needs to be done through a proactive reliance on community resources. In other words, it's not enough for the police to just detain criminals. It's very important for the police to rely on elements in the community to help it basically produce less crime. And next, please. And doing this by seeking to change crime-causing conditions. And this is the key departure of this definition from anything else that was out in the literature. And keep in mind, this is something that we really should pay attention to. Police do not commit crime. Let's not be facetious for a second. Of course, there are police officers who commit crime, like university professors and doctors in hospitals and bankers. Everyone commits crime here and there. But generally, police are the custodians of the crime statistics, not of the criminal incidents themselves. They don't produce them. And that's a major departure from traditional ways of looking at crime production. Next, please. So all of this assumes, and this is probably one of the key issues of the definition, a greater need for accountability of police, elected leaders, and the community in general. In other words, it's a partnership with the community and the elected officials, along with greater share of the public in decision-making, and doing this through identification of service needs and priorities. Not all citizens need the same types of services at the same time. And then a greater concern for civil rights and liberties. And keep in mind, this was written in 1992, not in 2019 or today. So that is the nature of the relationship of the 92 definition to the 2019 definition. I am very honored to say that I've served as a member of the Community Policing Committee for the International Association of Chiefs of Police for about 20 years, and for the last 3 years, I chaired that committee. So that's it in a nutshell.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Friedman. And I want to ask you a little bit more about Gilly. But before we do that, we want to make this as interactive as possible tonight by a show of raising your virtual hands. How many of you are actually already familiar with Gilly? Okay, well, we're going to unpack it. So on the screen, you'll find on Gilly's landing page, if you will, online, the first statement you'll see, and you'll see that Gilly marks itself as being partners against crime. Dr. Friedman, as the founding director of this award-winning organization, Gilly has worked with international communities, including Israel and the United States. Can you explain to us about the training that occurs with Gilly and the work that Gilly does, and how it actually contributes to eradicating hate and bigotry?
Okay. I'll try to be very brief, but Gilly started when I found out that Atlanta was awarded the hosting of the 1996 Olympic Games. And while on one hand, I was elated to be in a city that is hosting the Olympic Games, the second thought that came to mind or crossed my mind was the terrorist attack in Munich in 1972 in the Olympic Games at that time that murdered 11 Israeli athletes and a German police officer. And that desire to try and help Atlanta not to have an incident like this in the city, or if an incident like this happens, to have the law enforcement community better prepared, that's what sort of compelled me to try and develop the program. Since then, Gilly has become a law enforcement leadership development program, namely how to train leaders of police to do a better job and provide better services to the communities that they serve. The underlying idea is to understand crime better, to understand policing strategies better, but also to understand the citizens that are being served. And if you just look at police in a very narrow perspective, it limits the scope of what police can and should be doing, but also what citizens need to expect from police to be doing. So what the program is trying to do is emphasize all of these components of the community policing definition that we have just discussed and expose police leaders to what makes a society tick, what are the issues of concern to society, and then perhaps treating police leaders as CEOs of a company, but not a private company that is there for profit, but a company that is not there for profit, but it is there to provide social services, in this case, police services, to the community. And in a sense, to look at the citizens as clients. If you adopt that approach and you learn from sources of best practices and sources of excellence, my hope is that that helps police leaders, A, move up in the organization or laterally to other organizations, and then provide better services. And I'll give you many examples, but I'll stop with one. Recently, I had a discussion with a police chief who participated in the program, and he said that one of the takeaways when he came back from Israel was that he learned to treat his police officers as human beings. And I was a bit surprised to even hear that. You mean you didn't treat your police officers as human beings? He says, no, I took them for granted. If you take your police officers for granted, you probably take your citizens for granted. So before you try to treat your citizens better, you need to also treat your officers better. So that is a humane approach that is probably the first step to fight hate, because hate is a human behavior, unfortunately. It's a human attitude. And if you allow officers to be exposed to the possibility of being better human beings, they will be better social service providers. And I'll end with one example that is I think, very important. Last year, we had a delegation of about 20 or 21 law enforcement leaders in Israel. We went to the city of Akko, and we went to the Jazeera Mosque, which is one of the most important mosques in the world. In there, the imam of the mosque and the chief rabbi of the city, it's a mixed Arab-Jewish city, had a dialogue for about an hour and a half on how each one of these clerics helps each other resolve the problems within their community and any potential tensions between the two communities. And I will tell you, these were 20 police chiefs and sheriffs who looked at this dialogue and their jaws dropped to the floor because they have never seen anything like this. It also goes to show how important it is to collaborate with the community, how important it is to rely on community resources, exactly as the definition says, and how important it is to listen to what the other side has to say.
Thank you, Dr. Friedman.
Thank you. And now I'm going to turn to our Gilly graduates, Chief Davis and Chief Turner. As leaders and as Gilly graduates, how do you see community policing as a way to confront contentious relationships among officers and the community which they are a part of?
I'll allow Chief Davis to start, and then I'll follow.
Okay. Well, you know, I think just as you know, people, we have to approach our work as people. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in the uniform and titles and, you know, what we're responding to a call about, we forget that we are part of the community. And as Robbie talked about the foundations of community policing, Sir Robert Peel said the police are the community and the community are the police. And I think if we remember that aspect of it and we continue to reiterate that aspect of it, then I think it will help us to avoid some of the issues that we have of not being connected to the community and to the issues that our various communities face, the unique problems that various communities face. So I think community policing is critically important, and it should be sort of embedded in everything we do, no matter where an officer works, whether it's in public affairs or whether it's in criminal investigations division. I think community policing should just be baked into the organization's culture.
I will absolutely agree to that. I think, first of all, let me just say this. I was fortunate enough to police in the community that I was born and raised in for more than 35 years. Fortunate enough to become the police chief. And because of the community that raised me and that invested in me, I felt compelled that we needed to be involved in that community. And we did that by allowing our officers, encouraging our officers to be engaged. When I became the police chief in 2010, we were coming back from two major crises within our police department. One, we had a botched drug raid in 2008 where our narcotics unit falsified an arrest warrant and a no-knock warrant and shot and killed a 92-year-old woman on the southeast side of Atlanta. We lost our community and the trust that we had there. Just prior to me taking over, we had another similar situation where no one died, but our LGBT community, we had a botched warrant that took place in a club. And so we had the community really at odds with us. With our leadership team and working with the community, we built and put together a strategy and stayed fixed on that strategy and began to deal with people one person at a time, staying consistent and listening to that community and really becoming and gaining that trust with that community again. I am confident that where we are right now in America, our police officers are they are really in a tinderbox as it relates to how we do this work. I think we've got to figure out a way on how we do small steps, a little bit at a time, getting our officers out of the cars, having conversations with their community, listening to those, at least to these folk that are walking the street, those homeless folk. One act at a time will change the trajectory of what's going on in our society. I am confident that I spent more than 35 years of my life in a profession that I absolutely love. But you cannot do this work unless you have a desire to serve and protect. However, you cannot serve and protect communities that you don't know. You're only policing communities, and that is not consistent with any theories of community policing. We've got to find ways to get our officers to re-engage with communities. And if we don't, we will continue to have this tinderbox that's going on around the country. But it's not one-sided. Community policing is a theory, but it requires the community to become engaged with the action of policing and protecting their community, working as partners with the police department so that you are not in fear of crime in your community. What are those elements that we can do and work together to become a better society, a better police community? But the only way we get there is to engage and begin to have relationships that people trust and believe each other.
Thank you so much, Chief Davis and Chief Turner. What we're going to turn into our second segment of tonight's discussion, where we will start discussing reform and reconciliation. And I must have a moment of honesty. As a Black man, I vividly remember the conversation as a young boy that I had with my parents. And during this talk that I speak of, it's not the talk that every American household has, it's the talk that every Black American household has. And in this talk, I was reminded by my parents that I had one job only, and that was to make it home at the end of the day, right? And I can remember conversations with relatives and those in the community who made it very clear to me that no matter what happens, we don't call the police, right? This growing sense of mistrust and from both the historical context and the situations that we're seeing now, we see this growing mistrust, especially from minority communities. So in light of these recent incidents, I want to ask you, Special Agent Ahmad, during our personal dialogue, you talked a lot about trust, which you indicated involves truth and transparency. How do you see officers and community members establishing the best level of mutual trust and respect?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the Consulate General for inviting me and allowing me to be a part of such a distinguished panel. I have the utmost respect for Chief Davis, Chief Turner, and Dr. Friedman, who all are personal friends and colleagues and mentors to me. So I can sympathize with your feelings because as a young man, it was, I want to say, one particular incident that I can vividly remember in which I had an encounter with police officers that actually propelled me into law enforcement. It was through that particular interaction that I felt like my rights had been violated, but I was frustrated because I didn't know exactly, to the letter of the law, what my rights were. But it made me curious, because I thought that something had to have been wrong with that particular encounter. And so I began to take criminal justice classes one after another. And the more I took, I ended up not even having to declare a major because I'd already taken so many of the classes, but the more intrigued I became. But as I grew and gained an understanding of what law enforcement was supposed to be, then I start to feel as if, I could be a positive vessel for change by, actually joining the ranks of law enforcement. And so the establishment of trust, you heard Chief Turner talk about it just a minute ago. And listen to what he said. He talked about 2 different incidents. And he didn't beat around the bush and say, well, there was an incident. He came flat out and said that this was something that the police department did, and it was wrong. So that's, I think, the first step is, when appropriate, you acknowledge that, there has been something that went awry. And then you set and plan a motion in place to fix that. A part of that is going to be internal, to deal with what actually happened with the people under your charge. But then he talked about the other part was they realized and recognized that the relationship with the community had been damaged. And then they worked hard to repair that community and regain the trust of that community. So I think the trust actually begins with mutual respect and dignity. Citizens want to feel, when they have encountered a police officer or a law enforcement officer in any capacity, that they maintain their dignity after that particular encounter is over. A police officer wants to feel respected in doing his job. So when you hear Chief Turner talk about it's mutual, there are things that the citizens can do to help us, because most of the crimes that we solve are solved through the assistance of the community. And that's more so when the community feels like they can trust us. But they can trust us when they see that there's transparency, there's accountability, and that we then try to repair that relationship and try to move forward. Part of it comes from good leadership. I've never worked for Chief Turner, but I have worked alongside Chief Turner and Chief Davis. But one of the things that Chief Turner did that I can vividly remember is that he established and communicated a vision of the police department to everyone that he came in contact with. So he didn't take for granted that anyone knew what the mission was. But once you establish that mission and vision, and you reiterate it constantly, to the point where I've never worked for the Atlanta Police Department, but Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was reduce violent crime, protect the public, and improve the quality of life for the citizens of Atlanta. Am I on point?
You're so close. Yes, sir. But I appreciate that, and I would like to just say one thing to Wendell. Wendell, your dialogue prior to Rafiq coming on, you talked about this not calling the police. I really just want to kind of push back just a bit on that theory. When I was the police chief, then I retired in December of 2016, but I had the opportunity to talk to Rodney Bryant, our present police chief in Atlanta today. The number of 911 calls in the city of Atlanta is tracking at about 1.2 million calls to 911, not self-generated calls. These are calls where people are calling 911 for police assistance. And so I want people to understand we will never be a society without police. We've got to find a way to be more proactive, to resolve issues, and to bring us together to work on how we change the dialogue and the trajectory that we are in this society as it relates to policing.
Yeah, and I think that comes from a lot from community engagement, of the police, so that the community knows the police before there's a crisis. So the more that happens, whether that is town hall meetings or some type of community service, there has to be a presence. I think Chief Davis said that, you have to, what was Chief Turner? You have to know the community, and the community has to know you. So they have to be able to, get to a point where when they see the chief, or not even the chief, when they see different officers in their community, they're familiar with them. They know who they are, and they know, they begin to build trust with them, and they know who they can talk to. I think Dr. Friedman talked about we have to involve the faith-based community as well. So we have to make sure that we're reaching out to the churches, the mosques, and the synagogues, and making sure that that they talk to us, and that they know that we will talk to them. And what happens in these situations is once you begin to build that trust, then when Chief Davis steps out in front of the microphone when an incident happens in her community, they say, "Oh, I know Chief Davis." So I'm more likely to accept, what she's telling me, as truthful and transparent, because I've had dialogue with her and I know her and I believe her to be a person of integrity. And so these things help when you get buy-in from the community with those faith-based communities, community activists and organizers that you're having communications with. All of these things help to build that trust so that when you actually have incidents, in your community, you're able to have that meaningful dialogue, and hopefully through the things that some of the things that we do with Noble, as far as like the law in your community, these are opportunities where we're educating the public, on their rights, on the policies and procedures of law enforcement. And we're talking mainly to young people, because we don't want them to have the thought process that Wendell has. We want to change that by letting them see us, as regular people, as human beings, but regular people who are just happen to be doing a job. So that's how I think, one of the ways that we can, or some of the ways I think we can turn the ship around.
Thank you. I can definitely appreciate that. And I can tell you that it's through positive experiences that those biases, and that's one of the things that we've been unpacking with this series that we're having against all hate, that these biases were unlearned, right? Because biases are things that are taught. And just like they're taught, they can be untaught. And we can be, through our experiences, true, not superficial, but true substantive experiences, we can unlearn these thoughts and these biases. So thank you.
So I want to turn again to Chief Davis and Chief Turner. Both of you have contributed significantly to the plan for 21st century policing. Can you tell us how you arrived at the recommendations for this bipartisan national policy, which spans across 2 administrations?
Well, I can.
Go ahead, CJ. I'm sorry. Chief.
Oh, well, and I know Chief Turner was very involved. I sat on several focus groups. I was not part of the core group, but I think Chief Turner was. But I will say that it was the contributions and the think tank of many professionals, not just law enforcement professionals, but community members and clergy and various individuals that talked about what 21st century policing should look like. And that's where those pillars came from. And Chief Turner, I guess you can probably talk a little bit more about that too.
Yeah, I think that President Obama really challenged Chuck Ramsey, who was the chair, along with Carol, I forget who was the co-chair, to produce this document and really get into the community and talk to all fringes of our society to come up with this plan, this 21st century plan. And in that, there were a very short period where there was a significant number of listening groups around the country where we began to hear from our faith community, our social workers that was dealing with all the challenges in our community, which ultimately came up with the 7 pillars that I really think that they really should drive where we are in 21st century policing. And one of the things that I will say that the City of Atlanta Police Department really contributed more towards was reducing crime through community policing. See, I am convinced that community policing is good policing. It allows people to feel safer in their homes. It allows our officers to solve crimes that have been generated in communities. And I will say this, if you look at the most heinous crime that you have, which is a murder, in our police department in Atlanta, you can always determine the engagement with community by the level that you clear cases. And so in policing, there's a crime. Our detectives go out and solve that crime and bring someone to justice for the act of that particular crime. Police departments are gauged by the way that they clear those numbers, what their clear-up numbers are. The Atlanta Police Department murder rate and our clear-up numbers always was above 85% when I was the police chief. And I contribute that to this. Murder crimes take place in communities. And if community don't feel comfortable with having conversations with police officers, they are not going to give you the information that you need to solve those crimes. And so ultimately, I think that if you look at clear-up numbers, and unfortunately, I love my partners in Chicago, both the present police chief and the one that just recently retired. The clear-up numbers in murders in Chicago is below 25%. And I think if you look at communities like Chicago and other areas, if the clear-up numbers are so low, you can be assured that community policing is not being practiced. People are not going to talk to people that they don't know. And that's a prime example. And so community policing, reducing crime is one that I think the city of Atlanta really hung their hats on. And we really was one of the forerunners in that particular area. So much so, under the Obama's administration, there were 10 cities that was chosen to really live out, if you will, the 21st century policing. And the city of Atlanta was chosen as the only major city police department because we were so close in all 7 of those pillars. Down to training, understanding that we had to stress our employees, stress our officers in training before they went to the streets. So real life training examples in our training exercises really, I believe, allowed us to have such a low rate of officer-involved shootings because of the stress level that we pushed people to in real life simulated training at the academy. And so there are so many components in 21st century policing that really drive us. And getting to what Chief Davis talked about, we have to acknowledge the negatives that we've faced and we've been on the wrong side of so many different issues as law enforcement, you know, and we have to acknowledge that and then move forward with our community leaders. I know I rambled, but the fact is 21st century policing is so relevant for the time that we find ourselves in. And the more we practice those pillars, the better off we are as law enforcement leaders.
Thank you so much, Chiefs. I want to continue our dialogue a little bit more about reform. But as I was thinking through, you know, ideas of what reform looks like and hearing these newer ideas of what police reform looks like, I ran across this video from Charlotte, which is also within the region that our consulate covers. So let's actually take a look. That's not it. Give me 1 second. Sorry. Sierra, while I'm pulling this up, do you want to hop to the next question?
Sure. This is a question for all of our panelists. We are seeing a growing demand for police reform, with some even asking that we defund the police. So as a current leader and former leaders on this call of large police forces, what does defunding the police mean to you? And would you say this is a proper path toward reform, or are there other avenues that you might suggest?
Well, I think defunding, just the terminology has had so many varying, you know, definitions depending on, you know, who's carrying the conversation. Some people literally mean defund and abolish the police. Some mean reallocate funds. Some mean look closely where funding can be extracted from police departments. So, you know, when I think in terms of reallocating funds or looking at budgets in police departments, I don't think there's a chief in the country that wouldn't agree that the police department has taken on more services than we care to. I remember under Chief Turner's leadership and earlier in our careers, we didn't have to respond to so many social services types of issues because there were social services resources in place. There were mental health resources in place. There were mental health institutions in place. There were all kinds of homeless, places that, you know, cared for individuals on the street or drug dependent community members. And unfortunately, over the years, funding has been taken away from many of those resources, and the problems, the social ills and social problems that exist in our many communities have landed on the laps of police departments. So much to the point that even in the state of North Carolina, police officers by law have to be the ones to transport involuntary commitments, individuals who need mental assistance. By law, police departments have to take on that responsibility. And we spend a lot of time and money weekly on various calls that have very little to do with, you know, the real public safety issues that, you know, traditionally I think community members expect us to respond to. So I think the term has varying definitions, and to some people who have always wished to abolish police, this is their opportunity to push that agenda and that ideology as well.
Well, I think you couldn't have framed that any better, CJ. I think that the fact is there are so many varying definitions, as you said. But I think if you look at where we are today, I talked about 1.2 million 911 calls for service in the city of Atlanta. I don't know what your calls for service are in Durham, but the fact is someone has to respond to those. If we talk about the true meaning of defund, if we defund and abolish police departments, who then police communities? Federal government, law enforcement, or the Army, or the U.S. Army. The fact is, without the police departments in our country, our society really simply falls apart. Yeah. And so what we have to think about is how do we get to a place where we're providing services to make people whole? You're absolutely right. The mental challenges that we find throughout our country, we cannot afford to turn our blind eye on those folk. They create so many challenges for communities all over America. It doesn't matter what city you go into, the homeless issues are a challenge, and no civilian are going to handle those situations without having law enforcement on their side. I'll tell you, some of the most challenging calls for service that I've responded to have been those mentally ill and homeless situations where people are just not stable. And if you don't have the right authority and the training to deal with those folk, we have, and you get the kind of actions that you see where officers utilize force when they don't necessarily need it. And that's why we also began doing training of our officers to make sure that they had at least the basic functions to be able to de-escalate mental challenges when they dealt with them on calls for service. And if you're not investing in training, if you're not getting people off the streets and taking people to training, then you continue to lay yourself out for a litigation. And so my challenge to police chiefs all over, defund. We need more officers, more police officers so that you can train and prepare for this new regime and this new element of policing.
Okay. Thank you both for your responses. Dr. Friedman or Special Agent, do you want to add anything? Robbie, you're still on mute.
Well, thank you. I fully concur with the comments made by the three law enforcement representatives here. I think they get it. I think they understand how difficult the challenge is, but they also very clearly portray the right direction. And nobody says it's going to happen tomorrow. It's a process. It's a lengthy process that requires patience, perseverance. Trust is not built in one day, and it can be lost in 1 second.
Right.
Thank you. Special Agent Ahmad, did you have anything that you'd like to add?
No, only that I concur with Chief Davis and Chief Turner and Dr. Friedman. I think that we're faced with tremendous amount of challenges, homelessness, like Chief Turner talked about, and mental illness. I mean, those are two huge problems that we see, and we need to make sure that we're equipped as a society to deal with that. And police officers are not, always the most logical people to deal with that. But unfortunately, in law enforcement, that's where a lot of those calls are directed.
And speaking of the video that we have to share with you, it's finally available now. I'm going to share it with you because it speaks directly to the topic that you're all speaking of.
This is the first time Officer Tim Purdy and 18-year-old Jeremiah Glover have seen one another since that dangerous day.
Long time no see. You been doing all right? Yeah. Yeah.
And this is the first time Jeremiah's mom has seen the now famous photo.
Wow.
And this is what happened.
This is 911.
May 12th, North Carolina, Charlotte. Jeremiah's mother calls 911 to report her autistic son missing. He's got a history of violence, maybe suicidal.
Oh, we're doing good, and I don't know what happened today.
Purdy, a 22-year police veteran's just starting his day. On the radio, he already hears two fellow officers have found Jeremiah, but he reads something else in their voices.
You know what? Let me just kind of head that way and see if I might be able to help out a little bit.
Driving up, he sees the officers physically struggling to restrain the teen.
I pulled right here.
And senses it's about to go very bad. His next move is remarkable.
So as I approached him, I just kind of got down on my knees, and tried to get to his level.
What'd you talk about after that?
Football, the Panthers.
The explosive situation turned into a conversation. A fellow officer was so moved by the scene, he took a photo. It went viral.
So tell me this, was the getting down on his level training or something you have just learned?
Just something that I've learned over the years.
Jeremiah's distraught mom remembers racing up, fearing the worst.
The officer definitely was on his level, sitting with them, communicating, and my son was safe.
Purdy is overwhelmed by all of the attention, saying he knows other cops do similar things daily without any recognition.
There you go. Leave on a good one, brother.
What could have gone wrong has turned out more than all right, thanks to a police officer who showed up armed with compassion. Martin Savage, CNN, Charlotte.
So I think that's a great example and can contribute to the conversation and dialogue that we're having right now on this matter. I want to ask you, Chief Davis, we spoke a little bit about this in our dialogue. How critical is leadership in police reform?
I think it's very critical. And I say that because, those of us in law enforcement have heard the saying, the speed of the leader is the speed of the troop. And, and leading by example is so cliche, but it is so true that you have to really believe in the philosophies that you convey to your staff and live it, walk in it, direct your policies in that regard. And Dr. Friedman talked about it earlier, community policing. Your policies need to be written in a way that embraces, community engagement. And just that video is exactly what I would like to see my officers do. Understand the challenges that community members have, that everybody isn't the enemy and everybody isn't a criminal, that's somebody's child, that's somebody who has had obviously a condition all of their lives, and their mother is very concerned about them. So to have an officer Purdy to be comfortable enough to get on his knees in front of somebody that's obviously twice his size and realize that I don't need tactics and operational know-how here. All I need is a heart. He came armed with his heart. And so that philosophy has to be conveyed, you know, from the top all the way down. And I know that's a heavy lift, because I can honestly say all law enforcement leaders don't have that same, or don't embrace those same policies, you know, or those same philosophies. So I think it's very important in order to shift culture in police departments that you walk the walk and you talk the talk, and you hold people accountable for not understanding when to institute some other step other than, you know, turning a situation like that into a use of force situation, as opposed to just talk to them like a human being and maybe we can resolve this issue.
Thank you. Sierra?
So now a question for all of our panelists. From a political perspective, law enforcement is seen as having the role of having to execute the written rule of law. This often involves political pressure. How do you mitigate the political components of your job?
I'll let Chief Turner, he's retired and he can freely speak about politics.
Well, listen, you know, every city has its politics, as you can only imagine. And I'll give you one. During my tenure in Atlanta, we continued to have homeless situations. And we have a law in the city of Atlanta that if you feed more than 50 people at a time on the in the outside, or in an outside space, you have to have a permit, and you have to have the Fulton County health inspector to give you a permit. Well, the politics around that is that we were supposed to allow these people to be fed, and then have our partners come and clean up those situations because the homeless situation was so bad. And how can you not feed the least of these guys' children? And so the politics were that we were to turn a blind eye on that, but I think it was for the good. And ultimately, our city was clean on Monday, working with our partners. But the fact is, we turned a blind eye on that. There are so many things that laws are designed for us to adhere to. However, the politics in our cities are making decisions for the best as they see it, as it relates to the community that we're supposed to be protecting and serving. That's a small example. I have never, in the time that I policed in Atlanta as a police chief or deputy chief, was ever told not to enforce a law that would allow a criminal to go unchecked. But it was always those kind of situations where did it really make sense for us to write a ticket for a person that's making a left turn into a location that's not as well populated, and how can we turn that into a positive situation? How can we really begin to use that as an ambassador opportunity for us, for our city, specifically in downtown Atlanta? And so there are all kinds of laws in our cities that are still on the books. For instance, in Atlanta, it always come to mind, you know, you don't have the right, and it's against the law, the city ordinance, to spit on the sidewalk. There are a lot of things that you can utilize, but how many police officers have enforced those kind of actions? They're on the books, but politics will not allow you to do certain things. Again, going back to Sir Edward Peel, we get the police departments that society choose. And if we choose to make sure that our environment is subject to our communities, I think we all are in a better place. Politics beside.
Thank you so much, Chief Davis and Chief Turner. Just last week, we had a really good conversation with Emmy Pamour, who's a former director of the Ministry of Justice in Israel. And Israel has actually established an anti-racist unit. And in particular, Director Moore spoke with us about the work they've done with Israelis of Ethiopian origin. She also spoke with us about the work that they've done with Arab communities inside of Israel as well. And truthfully, you know, she was very frank and very honest in our discussion about the work that the government is doing. She mentioned the need for the government to take ownership and be accountable. This was an approach and is the approach that Israel takes after receiving her report and prior to developing this plan that they put into place. Continue the question that we posed earlier to you, Special Agent Ahmad. How does accountability factor into building trust among the community?
I think that Chief Turner and Chief Davis spoke a little bit about it, earlier. The accountability helps with your credibility. When Chief Turner talked about those two incidents earlier, the death of Catherine Davis and the situation at the LGBTQ club, there was accountability of the officers, that participated in both of those incidents. Now, the public may not necessarily hear exactly, what those actions are, but there was accountability, for what happened in those situations. So the accountability starts with what he said first, the acknowledgement that something went horribly wrong in one case because a person lost their life. So we as law enforcement, have to hold ourselves to a very high standard when it comes to accountability. And what does that mean? Does that mean that every officer that commits an infraction is automatically and summarily, terminated? No. That means that we look at this in the context of due process. So even in a situation where it involves a law enforcement officer, by Constitution, that same person is afforded due process. So sometimes the community may get a little bit upset about, well, why can't we see a dash cam video? Why can't we see a body cam video? Well, if we're asking for an investigation of that particular officer or that incident, part of the due process is that those things may or may not be released because you don't want to unfairly or unduly bias the public who would be potentially hearing this as a case if it did move forward. And so that officer is afforded due process. So we have to make sure that when we do things that aren't necessarily to the letter of our policy or to law, that those people are held accountable. We have to make sure that in dealing with the community, we're holding people in the community accountable as well. So I think that we throw these terms out like accountability, and it is very meaningful, but it has to be in its proper context. So it means we don't say, well, I hear the term that there's a blue wall and things like that, but it's up to the leaders to make sure that we're holding our people accountable, but we're affording them their constitutional due process.
And absolutely, and chiefs, for you, what does accountability look like within the force?
For me, it's standing behind the principles that you put forth in the department without deviating and being transparent about it too. I've been at Durham now for 4.5 years, and I can honestly say that there has not been one time where I was faced with a decision where an officer clearly violated a policy where that officer wasn't dealt with appropriately. And when I say appropriately, everything from a letter of reprimand to termination. I've had to terminate several officers in my department because of violating the policies and procedures that we have put in place. And what that does is that it lets everybody know that how serious I am about having a legitimate police department. So that accountability piece, I think, is really important. And the accountability piece has to be supported by, disciplinary practices that are fair for everybody. that's involved in that process. And as I said before, transparent too. I learned a lot of that through Chief Turner. Chief Turner was a mentor of mine. I was a direct report to him, and he had a very even hand, a steady hand in his leadership as it related to trying to make sure we had a department that was recognized for accountability. So, and with that, I won't, he didn't pay me for that compliment, but I'll let him speak more about that.
Thank you, CJ. You are so kind. But I will say this, one of the things that we try to do, and I will encourage any law enforcement professional, that is to be consistent. You have to stand on your policies, and you have to be consistent. You have to listen, and you have to do everything you can to hold those officers accountable to the directions and that you have laid out. And if you don't, if you deviate from that policy, deviate from your decision processes, then you put yourself and your agency in front of litigation that you can't walk away from. So you have to be consistent.
Thank you. Sierra?
So for our Gilly graduates on the call, are there any takeaways from your training with Gilly and your time in Israel that you see as useful to the work that you're doing here in the US?
Well, I'd love to take that first. I was fortunate enough to have a chance to go to Israel with the Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange, and it was one of the most amazing trips of my life. And not because it was a vacation, because Robbie didn't believe in that. I mean, he worked us hard every day. We worked probably 12, 13 hours every day. But it was because of having the opportunity to see behind the curtains of another country's law enforcement entity. And I took away two things: that their leadership was developed from the ground up throughout the entire organization. And I was really taken with that. And the other thing is, I think I went to Israel in 2017, and we had a small contingency of cameras in the city of Atlanta, but we were not able to, no, I'm sorry, I didn't go in 17, take that back. I went in 2009, and before I became chief. And we had a very small number of cameras in our city, being able to monitor some of the streets that we had in downtown. However, it was so disjointed that we didn't have the ability to see those that information and make any decisions from the data that was being collected. And so I took away two things. I took away the leadership, and so we established the Atlanta Leadership Institute, which allowed us to set up 5 pillars of training for our police officers. From the very beginning, that when they walked into the organization, they participated in leadership training as a recruit, all the way up to a tier 5, where our command level leaders spent time sharing with the Israeli police commander, and they partnered in that. Matter of fact, CJ Davis was part of that process that we started at that 5th peer. And then the other piece, if you look at what we're doing around video integration, I took information from what I learned in Israel and began to think about a concept of being able to integrate cameras from around our city through our private and public sector section to be able to mitigate the expenses of having cameras and being able to utilize that data to make decisions from. We now have in the city of Atlanta more than 12,000 cameras in the city of Atlanta that we monitor in our video integration center. It's not a full monitoring opportunity, but what it does, it allows us to use intelligence. If you look in downtown or throughout Atlanta, you'll see cameras with blue lights. We made a decision to make sure that those cameras was overt so that people knew that they were being recorded. I think that it changed behavior of people that might have a desire to do something illegal. But even if they did do a criminal act, we had that video data to be able to clear cases and to help make decisions from. when we began Black Lives Matter back in 2015, we utilized a lot of our cameras to move our resources away from the demonstrators and the protesters to keep from irritating the crowd. We were able to do that by monitoring that through our camera system. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I thought you were.
No, and I'll just finish by saying the Video Integration Center and our Atlanta Police Leadership Institute, that we've created more and more leaders because of my experience in Israel.
Thank you so much, Chief. I do want to, we're wrapping up the programming shortly, and I want to start answering some questions from the audience. I see, Frank, you asked a question about highlighting some of the lessons learned from the recent issues in Atlanta. Unfortunately, our panelists cannot go into specific details about ongoing investigations or anything that recently happened within the city. But I think that we heard a little bit more about some of the lessons that these law enforcement executives have learned over their time in leadership. I do see one really great question, and it's something that you spoke of in our conversation, Chief Davis. It says, how do hiring practices at law enforcement agencies affect community policing?
I think that's a very critical aspect of what we do, in all of our organizations. And I've said it even when I first went to Durham. One of the things I noticed was that my recruitment unit was all white. And, I work in a city that's a very diverse city. And to me, it's always important that the police department reflects the community that we serve, and including our immigrant community as well. And so I purposely challenged my staff to, number one, diversify my recruitment unit, and to strategize in ensuring that we had minorities applying, to become police officers. And it wasn't so much that we couldn't hire minorities.
Well,
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. And I was just gonna say that it was important for us to be intentional and where we recruited. Historically Black colleges, cities that have bilingual applicants that were interested in criminal justice fields, making sure that we attracted women in our department as well. And also we started a program called Homegrown. And we wanted to make sure that individuals that live in the city of Durham had an opportunity to serve their community through law enforcement. So we had special, recruitment drives, and we still do, to try to hire individuals out of the communities that they live in, because they have more of, a connection with the history of the community. So, that's a good question, Wendell, and I think is very important. We're just 3 individuals that have led, agencies, and our strategies and processes probably differ a great deal to some other chiefs in other areas that don't think it's important to be intentional about recruiting minorities.
Thank you so much. By the way, Catherine Wolf from Durham says thank you for your commitment and the wonderful work you do with all their communities.
Thank you so much, Catherine.
There's also another really great question. And this one, I think maybe, Robbie, honestly, any of you may be able to answer. It says, community policing has been around for 60 years. And the definition has been around for I'm scared to say this because it's around the year of my birth, but almost 30 years. Why do you think law enforcement agencies either don't practice it or struggle with it?
Well, let me just say that the first part of the question is erroneous. The second part is spot on. Community policing has not been on for 60 years. There are a lot of police chiefs who say that police was always community policing. That is simply not true. Having cosmetic relationships where you just do PR, that is not community policing. It's important to develop and enhance relationships with the community, but if you only focus on relationship without the outcome of the relationship, that's cosmetic, commercials. It is not substantive community policing. I've been in too many conferences where a chief gets up on stage and says, oh, since the establishment of the first department in the United States, we've been doing community policing. No, accompanying a drunk from the cell of a city jail to his home, that is not community policing. That may be social service, but it's not community policing. The concept of community policing is the partnership, being proactive, solving problems, and particularly trying to understand what causes crime so you have less of it. So that's a whole different issue. So the second part, go back again to the second part of the question.
The second part of the question says, why do you think law enforcement agencies either don't practice it or struggle with it?
Okay, and this is why I said this is a spot-on question. First of all, you have to have a buy-in from the force. And sometimes it begins with the chief and ends up with the patrol officer. Sometimes it is maybe beginning in the command staff, trying to convince the chief. Rarely it comes up from the grassroots of the police department. But even when you have a buy-in of the police department, you still have to have a buy-in of the community. You have to have a buy-in of the mayor and the city council. You have to have the buy-in of your partners in the community. And building this, working as voluntary associations, when you don't have to do something, but you want to do something, that means that you have to create some sort of a buy-in. That's a lengthy process. Anybody who works with voluntary associations knows it's not a 1 day, 1 week, or even a 1 year process. So I think that the reason it is not that successful is because the level of commitment and the steadfastness of keeping it up for a long time, just missing. And it's much easier to talk about it than actually practice it. And you have, I'll touch a little bit upon the political question that was there earlier. Mayors are political figures. Mayors want results so that they can get reelected. Chiefs are appointed by mayors or by city managers or by city councils. These are different terms of service, and mayors want political results so they can show for the next cycle of the elections that they have some outcome and some results. And one of the things that I think could help the police for the long term is to bring in additional partners to this equation, namely housing, social services, education, health. These are very important components that are somehow neglected in this important partnership. And we always sort of expect police to do all of it alone. Police cannot do community policing alone. I think Special Agent in Charge, Rafiq Ahmad, said very clearly that you have to build trust, and building trust takes a long time. But it just takes the first step. Once that is done and there are successes, then that's the way to move forward.
Thank you, Dr. Friedman. I will ask our next question from Tom. He started off by mentioning how their decades of community trust building that we've discussed as important tonight can be undone in seconds each time an unarmed Black man is shot in the back. So his question is, two questions really. Why is there no focus on more training to provide police officers with the skills they need to de-escalate difficult situations? And also, why is it so accepted that police should be immune from liability and accountability if they have just an instantaneous feeling of fear?
So I'll take a stab at that, and I think we talked about it a little bit before. There are over 18,000 police agencies around the country. And when you think in terms of that many leaders having the opportunity or the whim to pick and choose which trainings are important to them, quite frankly, there are some individuals that don't buy into 21st century policing, that don't buy into de-escalation training and don't embrace those new concepts. So, and that's where Noble has really taken a strong stance as it relates to, you know, appealing to our senators and other legislators to push national standards so that agencies are forced to ensure that officers have de-escalation training. And also there's also elements about qualified immunity, because the laws haven't been changed yet. And there's a lot of conversation about it. And it's not that officers shouldn't be protected when they're within the scope of the legal scope of their responsibilities. It's that there are loopholes in qualified immunity where individuals who have committed atrocities outside of the scope of their responsibilities have sort of slipped through those loopholes and have been protected from laws like qualified immunity.
If I may, I would add something else, that sort of the story about when do you need to start educating a child, and when the woman is pregnant, the psychologist asks, how old is your child? And she says, well, he's not born yet. Well, how much pregnant are you? Oh, I'm in the 6 months. He says, you're 6 months too late. The issue is not just to show the de-escalation training, which is one specific methodology. What kind of a police officer do you want to hire? Because many of those who want to be police officers go there for the wrong reasons. And I'm not talking about not wanting to serve. I'm not taking that away from officers, but it's the power, having the force, and having probably the 2 a.m. chase. Even though most police officers don't shoot their guns other than in practice, probably in most of their career. And that's what the stats show. So the challenge of being a police officer, there is no profession in the world that there's so much expected, so much required, and so much demanded on a performance level with so little education and so little pay. So it's very important to increase the pay for police officers. I'll say that. And it's very important to appreciate what officers do. And that doesn't mean to accept the digressions when they have that, but to promote and appreciate what police officers do, and then hire the right ones so that you have a force that is capable of dealing with enormous levels of challenges. And we've seen an amazing example in the video of how to do it right.
Thank you so much. Again, I want to thank all of our panelists for participating tonight. We're coming to the moment of our programming where we wrap things up. I know that all of you are absolutely passionate. I want to bring Consul General Anat Zatan-Dadon back on to give closing remarks, and then I'll close us out with a brief charge. Anat, I think you're still muted.
I'm doing the talking to myself thing. I would like to really thank you all. This has been a very, very enriching evening. I've learned a lot, and I think that we could have easily spent so much more time hearing from each of you. But I think that when we think of our programming against all hate, so much of what has been discussed here makes exactly the components of that, whether it's leadership, responsibility, accountability, serving the community, being inclusive, and what we can also learn from each other. So thank you all, and thank you Sierra and Wendell for your wonderful moderation. And Wendell, to you.
So again, thank you all. I cannot say thank you enough. I do want to take a point of privilege and acknowledge some special folks in my life who have, as I indicated earlier, changed my bias towards police officers and towards law enforcement as a whole. Firstly, I'd like to thank Chief Dana Coleman, who is our police chief back in Houma, my hometown in Louisiana. I'd also like to thank Chief Joycelyn Johnson Parker at Southern University, and also who's a lovely lady who's joined us tonight, is participating and standing by and watching, Chief Valerie Dalton at Morehouse College, who had the esteemed privilege of working with Chief Chats after Chief Chats with her. So thank you all. On tonight, I charge all the officers in the community to see the humanity in one another, to connect beyond superficial bonds to those which are substantive. We must act now to stand against all hate. We must also be truthful and transparent in our approach. This is how we establish trust. Now is a crucial moment in our history. It is a moment of our history where we, the people, which includes police officers and members of the community, have the unique opportunity to create a society in which love is at the core and hate is not allowed inside of any door. Take a look at the words opportunity, and as we've highlighted in the word community, you'll notice that both require unity. That means that you and I, regardless of our self-identity, our vocation, have to do our part, and we have to do it together. Be bold, be courageous. These conversations against all hate, conversations about reform and reconciliation, among many others, may not be comfortable, but I charge you all to keep at your core your willingness to stand up against all hate. As our next portion of our series, Against All Hate, we will be discussing a very interesting topic that my coworker, Sean Watwood, has put together as our Director of Cultural Affairs. And this topic will be about music and how music has been used historically and even today to bring us into ties with one another. So our next topic will be on sounds of harmony. We have some amazing panelists, and we'll be sharing that information with all of you who have joined via email, and you'll see it on our Facebook page and on our Twitter account as well. So definitely sign up, and if you have questions, always feel free to submit them before. We didn't get a chance to answer all the questions from tonight, but we will be sure to follow up with all of you after tonight's discussion. So again, tune back in with us for if you want to tune into our Against All Hate web series. We'll be discussing Sounds of Harmony on October 22nd at 7 p.m. Before that, at the beginning of our conversation tonight, you all saw this wonderful clip for Shared Legacies, which is with one of our partners, Spill the Honey Foundation. We'll be conducting another student discussion and panel discussion, and then that one will be focusing on sports justice, and it'll be occurring on October 15th. So be on the lookout for these amazing events. Again, Dr. Friedman, I call you Brother Robbie now because I feel like your family. Chief Davis, Special Agent Ahmad, my wonderful coworker Sierra, Chief Turner, and Consul General Satan Dodon. Thank you for a meaningful and productive conversation tonight, and I look forward to many more.
Thank you all. It was an honor to be with all of you, and just an amazing, sincere, and just a good, cordial conversation. Not just it's not a lecture. And I go back with many of you many, many years, and it was just amazing to be together. Thank you all.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Thank you.
All the best.